There's a beautiful contradiction in non-duality, which is in fact full of so many beautiful contradictions. On the one hand, the search for spiritual awakening or enlightenment is said to be the piercing or penetration of the illusion of being an experiencing, doing entity or individual, right? That's Maya, that's avidya or ignorance. On the other hand, it isn't that. Because if non-duality were about the piercing of an illusion, it would be something that changed. Right? Initially there was an illusion, now there isn't. That would put it in the realm of the modifiable. Which is why it's said that the last illusion is the illusion of realization itself, right? Realization is always in contrast to ignorance. That's a duality. Whereas what's non-dual is something which is timeless, eternal, and permanent, unchanging. So non-duality can't be, ultimately, the piercing of an illusion. Nor can non-duality, therefore, be remembering certain characteristics or properties of the truth. It can't be the remembering, for example, of the thought, I'm not the doer. I'm not the experiencer. It can't be going back to some particular quiet, peaceful state of mind. Why? Because all of those things are changeable. All of those things come and go. All of those things are therefore contingent. They're circumstantial. We don't want any of those kinds of issues. We don't want to be dependent, to be contingent, to be circumstantial. We want what is always the case, what is permanent, what is effortless, what is stainless, what is perfect. Which means to say what is already the case, and always shall be, and always was. So non-duality cannot be about realizing things are wrong, realizing things are right, remembering things. It simply is the case, regardless of what thoughts or feelings we have, including all thoughts of suffering or ignorance or doership. Those thoughts, too, are nothing but the self. But aren't we taken by those thoughts? Aren't we suffering by virtue of those thoughts? No. The suffering happens to a fictional entity which doesn't exist. And we don't have to remember that fact for that to be the case. But if we don't remember that fact, aren't we suffering? No. That's misconception. There's nobody suffering any time, whether you remember it or not. There's nobody there who's ignorant. This is the misconception. But don't we have to remember that as being a misconception in order to enjoy the happiness of the self? No, that's also a misconception. Because that links seeing through the misconception with happiness. In other words, it's taking the premise of the one who is ignorant as being true. It's taking the belief that there is this person bound by these thoughts, by this narrative. It must be freed from it. But the freeing from it is not a particular change in the narrative, although that may happen, perhaps. But the recognition that the narrative itself is not binding. And that recognition is not simply in the narrative. That recognition is permanent. In fact, there is never not that recognition. Which means to say that that recognition truly is not a thought. It's not the thought that the narrative doesn't bind. One can have the thought that the narrative binds, that I am this experiencing doing entity, that very thought that I am this experiencing doing entity that is considered the heart of ignorance, is itself nothing but a modification of the light. It is the self. That's the non-dual recognition. And it doesn't require a recognition. It is the case, whether or not you recognize it separately as a thought or not. This is the mind-bending nature of the non-dual. What is changed? What is removed? The nature of the recognition of non-duality is exactly parallel to the nature of ignorance or identification. Look for ignorance or identification. In other words, look for the I. It vanishes. The more you look for it, the more it cannot be found. And in the same way, what then is being recognized in the non-dual? The true self is beyond thinking. So the recognition must also be beyond thinking. It is the case whether or not we think it's so or not. But that very thing is the thought that is a recognition. That's why it's called the gateless gate enlightenment, right? So on one side, there is this effort to see, to pierce, to penetrate. But the product of that piercing and penetration is to destroy the idea of piercing or penetration in the first place, to destroy the idea of there having ever been a gate, to destroy the idea of even that destruction, of the idea of there ever having been a gate. There is an undermining of itself. There's peace, peace, and nothing but peace. Even the thoughts of agitation are peace. Even the thoughts of ignorance are light. Even when you don't think it's the light, that thinking that it isn't the light is the light. You cannot escape peace or bliss. It's there whether you like it or not. It's there whether you recognize it or not. And yet, contemplating this fact through inquiry or surrender, seeing it for yourself, will result in the destruction of that quest. It's strange. It's strange. There's a formation of thought which is there for the seeker and which destroys its own history when its end is found. It goes from the historical, which is in time, to the timeless. It goes from the in-thought, from noisier to quieter, to the understanding that even noise is silence, that even thought is quietness of mind, that even mental suffering is in a profound sense peace and bliss. That is the nature of the self.